Okay, and I think it's the moment to start for us. Friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our fourth talk related to AI and ethics. Happy New Year to all of you, and again, thank you very much for joining us this evening. I will start sharing my screen as well, as we have prepared a small presentation for you. As you know, today we are pleased to welcome two special guests, Sebastian DENNERLEIN and Christoph Wolfbrenner. Together, they are researchers on AI and ethics, philosophy in general, and they have published an amazing, very interesting paper with a title in German called "Is ein Algorithmus böse?" and the translation in English being "Is an algorithm really mean or really bad?" So they came up with a very interesting framework that they are going to discuss today and present to us today. So we are really looking forward to our talk, to their talk. But before we go there, I would like, as usual, to take you through some basically some quick technological or more logistical steps, if my presentation wants to work as well. Okay, now it's better. Very apologize for that. Very sorry for that. We want to let you know that we are recording and also live streaming this talk, this session. So in case you want to switch off your camera, etc., you are given a heads up. Please mute yourself. There will be a dedicated exchange and question and answer session, and there will also, of course, there is the possibility to use the chat function in the Zoom if you have any burning questions that you would like to ask, and that cannot wait until the Q&A session at the end of the talk. So a little bit of background on this particular talk. Maybe some of you know already. This talk, this presentation is part of a bigger project and effort that two organizations have put together. Jamba Career for All and AI for Development Agency. Our main mission is basically to provide education, knowledge, and a deeper understanding on certain issues and social issues basically related to artificial intelligence. This is a program of 10 talks in total. This is the fourth one that we are going to, to have today. And as you can see on the slide, the fifth talk is coming up, and it will be in February on the 18th, and we will look into the benefits of artificial intelligence and how AI is really shaping the educational system. And if I remember correctly, the sixth talk, so the one coming up in March, will be related to the future of work. So stay tuned, share our events, and join them as well. As for today, we will very briefly look into reasons why we talk about AI ethics in the first place today, and what are the major concerns for society when it comes to ethical or ethics in artificial intelligence. So that will be a very brief introduction that I will give in a few minutes, and after that we will open the floor to our speakers to take us through their ethical by design concept and provoke our minds with their framework and their ideas. I think there are many reasons why we would have to talk about AI ethics. In particular, if you think of an algorithm that is basically based on data sets, and Sebastian and Christoph will tell us more about that. And if we understand that this algorithm will learn by itself and will perform even better than let's say a human being can do, etc., will be able at some point, once it gets really good, to make its own decisions and then also understand the pathway of that decision-making process, etc. So if we understand the power of the algorithm, if we understand how it works, that is basically based on a data set that has been collected throughout the years and throughout the time. And we understand that we'll at some point independently make decisions based on previous decisions and based on the data that it has been fed with. Then it is almost impossible not to question ourselves if these decisions that are going then to be taken are really bias-free, are really not discriminatory, are really clean, etc. So the importance of having a clean data set, and again, the speakers will go more into detail, is quite critical when it comes to AI and when it comes to the topic of AI ethics. And I had the curiosity just before this talk to look into the world of AI ethics on the web. So basically, I was curious to see how often was the word researched on web, right, on Google. And as you see here, there is definitely a spike in 2019, and it goes down a little bit in 2020, which may be due to the fact that the world has to deal with a pandemic currently. Just as simple as that, but it still remains a huge topic around the world. And in terms of interest by region in the topic, as you see, of course, my research was based on the English version of AI ethics, so I didn't look into a translation in French or German, and this is why you would see on this map highlighted mainly English-speaking countries. But I think it's quite crucial, it's striking how countries and people really start to be concerned with the topic and really start to engage and try to understand what this AI and ethics is all about and why is it dangerous for us. And very briefly, I think it's important for this talk, I don't want to take too much time from the speakers, but it's still important for us to know that we won't be able, in this talk, will not be able to cover everything and every single aspect related to AI ethics. It's such a broad topic that covers basically, the philosophical, psychological approach to it, to very technical, very very technology-driven approach. So we will not be able to go into detail, but I think it's still important for us to bear in mind or keep in mind that there are three, of course there are perhaps more, but we wanted to highlight those three main major ethical concerns that rose and are now present in the society and basically make some people's nights to nightmares perhaps, and very difficult to approach. So one is definitely related to privacy and surveillance, and we have seen the importance of the right ethics in AI, in particular in 2020 when we faced Corona and we had more apps tracking us, what we were, what we were doing, where we were, at what kind of point in time, etc. So privacy and surveillance remains a major concern when it comes to AI ethics. Then bias and discrimination, and this will be the main focus for this talk today. And then a little bit more of a philosophical one is basically the role of the human judgment in the decision-making process. So I am not going to go into details in this one, but I thought it would just be interesting for us to have a little bit of a broader picture on where we are at with AI ethics. And from here, I will introduce again Sebastian and Christoph. So Sebastian is also a very good friend. We met in 2019 at the AI Summit in Geneva, but he's also a postdoc researcher at the Technical University of Graz, and Christoph is also working at the Know-Center, which is part of the Technical University of Graz, and together, as I said, they have put together a beautiful research paper and the framework that are going to present to us today. So the floor is yours. Welcome and thank you very much.
Thanks for this very nice introduction, and in generally, thanks for having us today. What we want to introduce to you today is a framework which offers a way to tackle ethical issues that arise during software development. And it's good that this topic of ethical issues in AI is becoming more and more, let's say, a hot topic nowadays, as it's important to explore these ethical issues alongside software development. So Elena already came up with one very central term that is ethical by design. So we understand that our SREP framework must be based on design thinking. This means an iterative approach to developing something to be able to address these questions or these ethical issues as part of the development. There's also the term reflection in this SREP framework, so guiding socio-technical reflection of ethical principles. And reflection is usually approached a self-regulated approach where you say, okay, we help people who do it, who approach it themselves, and we support them by giving them a structure and an approach, a process to tackle it themselves. So this is the SREP framework, an ethical by design framework, which we will now introduce to you. I hope you can see my screen now. So, perfect. Let's start with a short motivation why it is important to check ethical issues in AI. On the one hand, in the future, it will become more and more important when there are robots based on AI that maybe interact with each other to also be able to legislate on AI. However, to be able to legislate on AI, it's also important to understand what ethical issues can arise and how to judge what is ethically correct or what is not ethically acceptable. So there is a need to have some guidelines to understand how this development of ethical AI solutions can take place and what are the rules for their usage. So it's important to understand and guide the software development to allow for ethical responsible solutions. And on the other hand, it's also important to understand how this process is running. So the topic, as Elena already said, is becoming a hot topic. So there's now also a book from O'Reilly, 97 Things About Ethics Everyone in Data Science Should Know. And as my colleague, Christoph, who will later on also give you an example of the application of our framework, ask the author or the editor of this book what would be contributions he would think are interesting. And the editor, Bill Frank, said, oh, we want to have concrete examples and of ethical issues in practice and guidance how to resolve them. Because there's very much abstract on this topic, but there is not very much on how to actually approach these ethical issues. And this is what motivated us to first have a look on what's there currently, what supports software developers in their challenge to produce ethically responsible systems. And the first thing that we stumbled upon were ethical principles. So you've probably heard about these ethical principles already, and let's just underline a few. For example, transparency. Transparency is an ethical principle that says you need to understand what's going on in a learning algorithm and how he's actually working. So other synonyms for that are explainability, understandability. Let's just underline another ethical principle is, for example, justice and fairness, being fair to different minorities also, and not just preferring some of the society. So justice should be something, and fairness that an AI solution incorporates. And the problem is that nowadays, AI guidelines that are promoted, for example, by the EU, just stick to that level. They just say, you need to be transparent, you need to be fair, you need to be responsible, but there's actually not much guidance beyond that of how to get to that point. So we said, we think that ethical by design is an approach. So to, for example, respect people's rights to choose how they engage with the products, to balance appropriate privacy and security is very important, to integrate planning for how to handle failure, including transparency and reporting, to support the product or service throughout its whole lifespan. I just underlined a few of these things, and it makes clear it's not something that you can do in one run, like a waterfall model. So you can't just, you can't elicit ethical requirements at the beginning and then just design a system and be sure, oh, I'm ethically correct. This won't work, because you can't do it in one run. So basically it says design thinking should and can be ethical by design. And this means understand that you will run into ethical issues and be aware that you want to tackle them honestly and care about them. So our SREP framework, I'm now stepping into what the framework understands under these AI solutions. So we understand that these AI solutions are not merely technological things. They are always combinations of a human and a technology. Let's just say if you, for example, need to use, let's say, a conversational agent, you need to give input to this agent. So it won't work if you don't give input to it. Then it will answer, and it will only become better if several persons use this over a longer time span, so that it got better and better. So AI is always a combination between a human and a technology. We've depicted that here in this circular depiction, where the prototype, so the technological element, is in the middle, and which is the technology and the service. For example, let's say each technology has at least an input and an output, and the human can be differentiated between and can, let's say it that way, can be a performer, so use the AI solution, or he or she can be the receiver, so being impacted by the outcome of an AI solution. Ropol, for example, says that such a socio-technical system is called all reciprocal relationships between humans and technology when it comes to the creation and use of technology. And this actually applies 100% also to AI solutions. We understand the SREP framework and these socio-technical systems to iterate over time during development and usage. So what's a design cycle or a design iteration? Designing software together with developers, designer, and domain representatives by iterating prototypes along development and usage. This means if you incorporate a design thinking or design-oriented approaches in software development, let's say agile software development, then you define an iteration, you develop the prototype, and then you confront your stakeholders with a prototype to receive feedback on how good your assumptions have been. And then you take this feedback and learn from it, reiterate the prototype, include new features, for example, or adapt the features. And then again, you confront the users with the prototype. And this is what we actually differentiate between build and evaluate, or development and use. And now there's something interesting. The human role is not the same clearly during development and usage. While the human role during development is, for example, being a designer, a UI developer, or a backend developer, to be able to develop the technical system during the design phase or the development phase. During the usage phase, the human is, as I've already touched beforehand, the performer or the system impact receiver, so the user. While on the usage side, it's always different user roles. It's on the development side, different development roles or design team roles, let's say it that way. And now in our framework, we say it's important to identify these socio-technical interactions, the interactions where a human interacts with a prototype at one point along this design cycle. This is very abstract, so let me give you an example. During the development phase, so when the system, the AI solution, is developed, then there is, for example, a data scientist cleaning a data set. This is what Elena introduced to us beforehand. So data sets can be biased. So a data set needs to be cleaned so that a algorithm that has been trained on the data set doesn't adopt the bias, which can result in unfair treatment. And so the data scientist has to clean the data set from these biases. This interaction of the human role of the design team, the data scientist, and the technical element of is the data set. And this interaction, data scientist cleans data set, is one socio-technical interaction. Let's look on another socio-technical interaction during the usage. Let's say when a user is using a system such as, let's say, a conversational agent, then the system impact receiver is the person who talks to this conversational agent and receives the outcome. And what we propose to do now is to reflect on these points in time during each design cycle. So these points in time, we do call them socio-technical interactions, and we say it's important to ethically reflect about these socio-technical interactions. And this means to ask yourself if the data scientist cleans the data set in a way that it's transparent or that it's fair what results from it. And the same is if a user is using a conversational agent, we can ask ourselves, is this transparent what is happening there, or is it fair what's happening there? So now this was just a very general introduction to what the framework is about. And again, why is it important to use such a framework? And we will now go over to an example that Christoph will introduce to us, where he will apply this REP framework to the AMS, so Arbeitsmarktservice in German, to the AMS algorithm that has been in the news quite some time now. In the end, it wasn't even rolled out, at least to my current knowledge. And why wasn't it rolled out? Maybe because there have been some ethical issues. And this is what we want to do now, to just look if our framework is able to identify some of these ethical issues that happened there. So why do we apply SREP to the AMS job seeker classification? Facilitate identifying, understanding, and exploring ethical issues in co-design based software development projects, which means not only saying it has to be transparent, but where has the software system to be transparent? So breaking it down and becoming more detailed. And how do we propose to do that? By reflecting on the relevance of compliance with ethical principles, but not overall, so, but at these socio-technical interactions during development and usage.
Thank you, Sebastian. I will now take over and I will try to get the remote control from you.
Worked perfectly, you can take over.
Perfect. Oh, perfect. I think I cannot control the slides somehow. And I also cannot hear you right now.
Could you try it again?
No, it doesn't work. I'm sorry. I can only, oh, when I think when I click, it goes to the next slide. Yeah, perfect. Just go back one. Thank you. Okay. Sorry for the short delay. Welcome also from my side. I'm the aforementioned Christoph, who is now in charge of letting you know about the AMS algorithm. So just a quick heads up as we start. I will not be able to give you the complete picture. There's a lot of history regarding the AMS algorithm. We don't have a lot of time. I'm just trying to give you the fundamentals. I'm just trying to give you the gist of it, that what we think is the most critical part of it, and the part where actually the magic, or let's say the black magic, happens in that case. So as Sebastian already said before, the AMS is the Austrian Arbeitsmarktservice, which is responsible for basically matching job seekers with vacant jobs, supporting them, giving them or putting them into let's say counseling programs or qualification programs, seeing that job seekers have the proper financial support, and so on and so forth. So they have a lot of things to do, but one of the main things that they do is the actual counseling of job seekers. So in that case, there is an advisor usually that you get sit with, and who is basically checking on your personal situation, checking on your job history, and trying to find a way to get you back into a job, basically. Or if you cannot find a job at the moment, he or she is going to try to put you into some program to either learn something new or, well, basically carry over the time until you get back into a job. But as they do so, and as they have done so in the past, they have, of course, gathered a lot of data about you and me and everyone else who is in the Austrian job market. So there is data about what gender people are, of course, the age group, the country groups that they are from, education, how compliant they have been with programs, and so on and so forth. So it's a diversity of data that they have collected over time for job seekers, which is fair regarding what they need to do in a job market. So there's not a big issue with that. But now, with new technologies at hand, they have come to try and employ these data to actually optimize some of their processes. And one way of trying to optimize their processes is to take parts of the decision that the advisors make and basically, well, automate them. So say the advisor gets to decide whether somebody is getting financial support or not, or whether he or she is going to get admitted to a program. Some parts of that decision are going to be carried over to the AI partly. So what you're doing now is to taking all these data that they have collected from and about us and run a classification algorithm over it to put us into different classes. I named them buckets here. And the classes basically reflect your chances of getting back into a job in the next few months. And regarding and depending on in what bucket you get put, you have different consequences awaiting for you. So if you have a high chance of getting into a job in the next 6 months, then you will not get any or low support because you will get a job anyway. If you have a low chance of getting back in the job in the next few months, you will not get any or just low support because, well, basically you're a lost cause. And if you're in neither of those groups, then you will get full support because the assumption is that you are close to getting into the bucket A, into the group with a high chance of getting a job, and therefore there is sufficient evidence to support you in a way to put you in the bucket A, or to basically try to improve your situation to get you moved up to the bucket A to find a job. And this classification is basically done by the algorithm. There's more to it than that. It's more complicated than that, but in essence, that is what it does. With one big difference at the end, the advisor still gets the last word. So you can imagine the advisor sitting in the counseling room with the job seeker, and the algorithm has been run in the background. And then there's a big A, B, or C flashing up on the screen to indicate what the algorithm thinks the group should be that you should be put in. But the advisor gets the last word on which group you really get put into and which kind of support you get, which puts a little bit of pressure on the advisor, I would say, because they have to kind of reflect and argue with this seemingly obvious and objective answer that the computer system is giving them, which is, of course, not obvious at all and not objective at all. And yeah, so the boss of the AMS has, of course, faced his fair share of criticism for this solution. And there was a lot of backlash in academia, but also on social media and in media in general. And they have defended their solution, I would not say to the teeth, but they have put up quite a front to defend it by referring to the fact that their intentions have been nothing but good and fair, and that their intention basically is to put the resources that they get from the government to the best possible use for the benefit of all of society, which is a good cause to use resources. I would not argue with that, but it still depends on how you use the resources, and it clearly should not be a matter of economic efficiency at all, but also of other considerations. But what the head of the AMS basically said is that, well, the algorithm might be wrong sometimes, because that was the initial criticism. It might be wrong sometimes. Algorithm might be wrong sometimes, but whether it doesn't matter if the algorithm is wrong. It just matters that the advisor together with the algorithm gets to a good result, and that they form a good judgment together, and they are convinced that this is actually possible. So what he, in my opinion, basically is saying is that, well, okay, our advisors are not good or fast enough. Well, let's say fast enough or inefficient. So we need to support them with an AI solution to basically take off workload from them, which basically assumes that they're kind of inefficient in some way. Not a personal insult, but though they are a little bit inefficient because of some organizational reasons, probably. But on the other hand, we have inaccurate algorithms that really sometimes give wrong results, which they should not care about because there is a joint decision that is going to be made. So we have this sweet spot in between inefficient advisors and inaccurate algorithms that we might jokingly, well, put our focus on here. Of course, it's not as easy as that, but you could run this argument ad absurdum based on his statement. In any case, our framework is trying to be as flexible as possible. And as Sebastian already iterated before, there has been this meta study with all these ethical principles that have come up in, I think it's now over 100 different guidelines that have been put out regarding ethics and AI. And you can basically mix and match as you desire and as your personal preferences go, as an organization or as an individual. But for the sake of argument here, we're going to talk about the 4 primary ones that are, well, mentioned the most in all the different studies, which are transparency, justice and fairness, non-maleficence, and responsibility. But as SREP, as the SREP framework is flexible, you can choose whatever you would like to do. But we are going with these 4. And as Sebastian also already iterated, we are talking about socio-technical interactions, which means that we have on one hand some kind of different roles on the development side and some kinds of different roles on the usage side of the system, and they are interacting with different parts of the system to either develop it or use it. And in this case, we have broken it down to a few roles to make it more simple, basically saying that we have one development team to make it even more simple, which is responsible for developing the whole solution. And we have a performer or performers that are basically the AMS advisors. And we have impact receivers, which are the job seekers, which basically get faced with the consequences at the end of the day. And we're going to pick a few of those out now. In essence, we're going to look at 3 different versions and look at how different ethical principles might lead to different kinds of criticisms or kinds of not exploitations, but identifications then. So if you look at the impact receiver, which is the job seeker, and the output of the system that gets generation, you can then basically mix and match that with the ethical principles that we have named before and talk about different issues that might arise and reflect on them. And that is exactly what we did. So I'm going to pick out a few here. For example, regarding fairness and transparency, fairness and justice, the question for the job seekers would be if they're all treated fairly or if there is some kind of preference to some job seekers and some, let's say, at a disadvantage for others. So for example, let's make it quite blunt, white people at an advantage with people of other skin colors. Could be the case. We don't know actually. Or another one would be, this is one question that always comes up, who is actually responsible for the results of the algorithm? Is it the CIO? Is it the CEO? Is it the advisor that is talking to the job seeker? We also don't know. So there's no real clear evidence who is at the end responsible. We can just assume it is going to be the chairman of the AMS, of course, but at this point in time, there is not anyone known other than that. Let's go to the next one, I would say. The next one is, it's the, I can once again not control the slides. Sebastian, could you go to the next one, please? Thank you. So this is quite interesting. The next one is the performer also interacting with the output of the system. The performer is, in this case, the advisor. So we are assuming that the advisor is actually a primary user of the system and is giving, let's say, second-hand information or second-hand recommendations to the job seekers. Because the system is not directly interacting with the job seekers, it's interacting with the advisors firsthand, and then with the job seekers. And this leads us to some very interesting questions, which are, for example, how can we guarantee that there is a fair recommendation over all advices for all job seekers? Because if you have people in the loop, which they previously had and they reintroduced after the algorithm now, you will have subjective reasoning for why some people should be in some classes and why others should not. So you're basically watering down a not objective decision by an algorithm, but at least a decision that is not triggered by emotion, and a decision that is not triggered by some situation where somebody's pleading with you for, I don't know, giving them some kind or putting them some kind into financial support to get their children fed or something like that. So there is a subjective element here that the advisors are bringing in. And the question is, why is it fair to give somebody support and somebody else who is in the exact same situation should not get the same level of support because he or she had another advisor who did not react as positively to the pleas of the one person and not to the other? So it's quite interesting to do that. But to be fair, this problem should have been here already. So it's not a problem that arose with the algorithm simply because, well, people actually already made subjective decisions in the past. As I said before, the responsibility question arises all the time. And let's go also to the transparency question here, which is, how did the result actually come to be? What are the factors that drove the output to say that some persons should be put into class A, B, or C? What is the main element that actually drove this decision and drove the algorithm to, what is the most correlated attribute with the output, to put it like that? And to a certain degree, the performers need to be able to explain, or at least to reason and understand why the decision came to some conclusion, because they have to interpret it and they have to actually overrule it if they are not really in agreement with it. And if they don't understand how the decision came to be, well, they will have a hard time arguing with themselves why it should be wrong. So if they don't understand why the system says A and they think B, then they might overrule a decision that they don't fully understand, and they might maybe oversee something that should be a reason for them to actually keep the decision of the algorithm instead of overruling it. So the topic of overruling an algorithm's decision is a huge one, partly because there is, well, some kind of bias to accept the decision because it has been done by a cold computer, to put it like that. But there is also some reason to automatically reject it because the computer could never warrant for all the different kinds of fine-grained things that happen in real life that the advisor might see, but the computer might not, or the AI system might not. Okay, last but not least, I have one more. Sebastian, please. Thank you. Next one. Sorry, this is the second to last one. Next one. Ah, perfect. Okay, so now we've finally we've started with the usage part now, because it's easier to grasp, because we've all been, I assume, in a situation of looking for a job. So, but less of us have been in a situation of developing an AI system. So we started with the usage part, and now we're going with the development part. And the question is most interesting here, in my opinion, is, for example, the question of climate change. So if you think about the harmfulness of AI systems, if you can maybe find an AI solution for a classification problem that is quite simple and it does not use a lot of computing power, but I could also go ahead and use a supercomputer in Vienna that needs to work for a week, maybe to train a huge neural network that will maybe get the same, or will get probably the same accuracy on the classifications, but uses a huge amount of energy to get to that decision. So it is to some kind feasible to argue that we should be minimalistic in our modeling, so as to not waste resources on unnecessary computing power. So that is a question that you should ask yourself when developing an AI solution. On the other hand, one other question that is quite interesting is the transparency one, which is mainly here about the composition of the team that has been working on the solution. Because I am quite sure that there is nobody on the development team who is currently looking for a job, because it kind of cancels out each other. So I assume that the input from the job seekers for the development team might be quite minimal. So I'm assuming that the team is quite one-sided in its composition regarding the people that actually will receive an output from it. They might be the ones receiving some output from it in the future if they don't do their job well, but at the moment they all have a job, but they are not in the situation. So they are kind of biased by their employment for building that solution, if you will. Okay, next slide, please. Next one, please. Thank you. So we are already at the conclusion here. As you might have noticed, we did not at all talk about the algorithm itself. And that is actually the really, really interesting part of let's say, our developments that we have made over the last 1.5 years, would say, is we started with the evil algorithm, because we read some paper where German government decided to police algorithms, which we thought that is a really, really stupid idea, because algorithms almost never are the problem, but all the other things that compose an AI system, from development to usage, might be a problem. So the algorithms giving you a wrong result is not really a problem of the algorithm itself, it's more a problem of the data, I would argue, or of the team composition, or of some underlying goals that you're trying to fulfill, for example, economic efficiency and so on and so forth. So the evil algorithm is actually, let's say it like it is a lie. The algorithm could not be evil, but still it's a good title. So,
and maybe if you think further, it's,
yeah,
we always had this socio-technical system saying AI solution is always consisting out of both. So if the technical system adopts biases from data, where did it learn it from? The human.
Exactly.
So it's always the other side that is still available to cause an error.
It's always coming back to us. It's always coming back to empirical observations that we made about usually what we ourselves did in the real world, and well, with all the biases that are already included in it. But as you have seen, is that SREP is actually quite flexible to be applied in different use cases. I mean, you've only seen one now, but you have to take our word for it that it is designed in a way that you can apply to different roles, and you can apply to different ethical circumstances or different ethical principles that you might want to adhere to, simply because it's based on this theory of socio-technical systems that is quite flexible, that it tries to explain in a very generalized way how the interactions between humans and machines work.
Maybe I might add something
one thing
here,
that
Christoph.
people, sorry.
Is it
Sure.
okay to add something here? Maybe let's say what's the crux of our system as well. It might fit very well to add that here. You've seen that I've in the beginning explained the system quite domain independently. So I've stick to general concepts like roles for the humans and elements for the technology. And if you think now about applying SREP to a certain domain, then the crux is, so the challenge is to figure out the roles that you need to keep in mind and the technical elements that play a role. Because to get one step, to get more detailed than just saying this technology has to be transparent or this technology has to be trustworthy, we need to figure out these socio-technical issues to not only ask this for the overall system, which you never can answer or which will be pretty hard to answer or to tackle, but to break it down to detailed points of this process of developing a software, and then to focus on these detailed points where it's much more easier to find solutions to these ethical issues because you know which element is addressed and which human is involved in that step. Just asking it for the overall system would be quite hard because you don't know which role to address and which technology could be involved in this process. So what we offer is to not only have a general view on that, but to get more detailed and to look closer what is involved in the generation of ethical issue. Sorry for the disruption, Christoph.
Not a problem at all. Thank you very much for your comment. I was just trying to wrap this up because I think we are already almost close to time, close to closing time, and almost a little bit over time, I think even. So just one more thing is really think about ethics not as some kind of burden that you have to some kind of, let's say, weak policy from law being a hard policy that you follow. It's more of a way of thinking about the new kind of USP. And think about how the US has been handling AI policies and how the EU has been handling AI policies. And clearly the EU is trying to figure out a way to employ AI ethics as some kind of selling proposition, if you want, to basically show what kind of values we in Europe have and what kind of values we want to communicate to the world when they use an AI application built in Europe. And let's break this down to our companies and our individual selves to say, we can use AI in an ethical way to communicate to other people what we stand for and not just what we can do. And that, I think, is also something that's very powerful and very relatable for potential customers, potential vendors, stakeholders in general, and also society in general to accept your AI solution. So I will close with the last line here on this slide. We kind of hear this a lot in innovation management and in design thinking and so on, but we kind of really do need a learning and failing culture, because if you don't make mistakes, you will probably not find out that you made a mistake. Sorry, what you can make better. So if you don't make mistakes, you will have a hard time finding out what you can really make better, apart from really trying out in the dark. And an error gives you really a good inkling of what actually can be done better. It's a dent in your life that you want to get out of your life and just improve on it. Thank you. I think we're done.
Thank you very much. Thanks to you both, Sebastian and Christoph. It has been very, very interesting and insightful for me, and I'm sure that also our participants benefited. I really liked your last question, last sentence, and I think we need more of that in Europe. We don't have that culture where we can learn from our mistakes, and I am happy to see that there. And also your example, IMS, everybody in Austria can relate to IMS, and I'm sure that other countries have a similar authority dealing with unemployment and can relate perhaps also to that. So thank you very much for bringing such a kind of quite technical topic actually down to everybody in the community and making it accessible for us all. Thank you very much. I would like to open now the floor and see if there are any questions from our participants online.
Can I just comment on one of the chat messages that have been there from Emanuela Zaimi? It's about the most common complaint that I've heard from people trying to find a job through AMS is sending them jobs that have nothing to do with their CV or with their skills. So I don't know if you know, but I've been unemployed for a year, a long time ago, a whole year, and I've had my fair share with AMS relations, I would say. So I can kind of relate with that. I can kind of subscribe to that, but I have to say it really, really depends on who your advisor is. And it's very, very different depending on what kind of AMS department or what kind of AMS regional institution you get to work with you. So, for example, I know for a fact that people with disabilities, as I have one, get different kinds of advisors than people that don't have disabilities. Partly because, well, people with disabilities might have special needs that they need to have taken care of in a job situation that some special advisor needs to look at, which is fine. On the other hand, I've also had my fair share of job, let's say, how how would you call this? If you get asked to apply for a job, is it like an application?
Right.
What would you call it?
Headhunters.
No, not really.
No?
No, actually, they tell you what kind of job you need to apply to, or at least they did that back then. So they say, look, there is a vacancy that we think fits to your profile. Please apply to it, and the please is pretty small in the email. So yeah, I've done that, and I made the experience that actually the companies are not responding to you applying for the job that AMS told you to apply to. So partly because the companies are biased against applications from AMS, which is quite funny actually, because it's their job to match job seekers with vacancies. But yeah, I think they could make good use of a recommendation system for bringing jobs with people together.
I hope they are.
Hopefully with a trained employee on the other side.
Of course, yeah. Okay, are there any more questions?
Yeah, so there is one more question on the chat from Laura saying, we know that data about employment decisions is not clean, and actually the humans are biased. So how do we actually clean the data?
I mean, the gender example is one that you can take easily there. So if you look onto job market data, historic job market data, you will have a bias in there. So men will get higher salary than women. This bias could actually be easily addressed by cleaning or correcting that in the data. And then this wouldn't be taken up by the algorithm, this pattern that male earn more than women. And then this wouldn't be taken on by the algorithm. So this is actually a very good example, because it says that the bias has already been there with the AMS employees giving better jobs to men, probably be an even man, or the companies just employing rather men. And this over time led to this job market data that is then furthered or taken on or adopted by technology, and then this pattern is just going on with the technology which has been there beforehand with the humans without technology. So again, the data or the technology didn't introduce that bias. This bias was there beforehand.
I would also like to jump in really quick here. In the general discussion, what people always bring as a counter argument to this algorithm is that it basically reinforces existing injustice in the job market because of using, let's say, uncleaned data that includes biases. So we know for a fact that when you give this algorithm the same kind of person with all exactly the same data, apart from switching the gender, you get a slightly higher score as a man than you would get as a woman. That is a fact. And the AMS says, you're correct, this is the result, but we're not trying to classify in a kind of an ideal world. We want to reflect the real situation in the job market. And I say that's fair, you can reflect the real situation of the job market, but it's your job as well to improve on the situation of the job market and not just go on as it is in a way. So I can totally understand that AMS has a need to have a realistic model of the job chances for job seekers. On the other hand, I think the need for a fair system overrules this plea for realism, I would say, to a certain degree. So there needs to be a middle ground. And yeah, I think it would have been good to discuss this publicly and also discuss this with officials on what actually the goal should be of that algorithm, because efficiency is a very it's a goal that you can simply attack.
There has been one more comment there relating to this discussion that cleaning itself is a kind of bias. but maybe it is more about decreasing the amount strength of the bias. And this is absolutely right again. So on the one hand, this identification of biases and how they are, and if they are part of a data set, this should be something that should be discussed, but it should also be technically, or let's say statistically, be carefully approached how to clean a data set. Because you can't just simply systematically exclude something. This can be dangerous because you can harm the data set and introduce new biases. So it isn't as easy always. And this is a good comment, thanks. We oversimplified it here maybe a little bit. So it's important to also be careful in cleaning, as you can introduce biases by that. Yeah, thanks for the comment.
Yeah,
so,
we have.
So just one more sentence to that. As you might have noticed already, we called our project initially the evil algorithm, but after 1.5 years, we should really rename it to the evil data, the evil data set.
There is one more question or comment from Angela. So she says, if you could talk a bit, or she's asking if you could talk a bit more on how you overcame some of the hurdles in translating an ethics-oriented AI solution into the technical and financial structures already in place.
This is not an easy one. I already wanted to ask if the question can be contextualized a little bit more.
Yeah, maybe Angela, you can give a little bit of context on what you had in mind, particularly related to what they presented before. You are on mute, I think.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation so far. I was wondering whether you could talk a little bit more, because when you are preparing your own framework in a way, you do have to think how it's going to be implemented at some point, obviously. You're not just doing it for the sake of creating a framework. That's the whole point of it. So I was wondering, like, what kind of considerations actually led you when you were preparing it, so it's easier to use this framework within, for instance, governmental structures that are already agencies, for instance, that already have certain technical structures in place, or if it's a little bit of a more business-oriented structure, then obviously you have to have your financial considerations in place as well. So what kind of mindset did you have? Yeah.
Now I got it. Yeah, very good question. And I can't answer it completely. So let's say it that way. We now made a first step to have another perspective on ethical issues, which goes beyond what's the state of the art. Yeah? Not just very generally, but going one step more into the detail and trying to figure out what's actually involved in this ethical issue. You're right, we already make up our mind of how we could support this framework with practices and also infrastructures to be able to, on the one hand, support the individual process or solution process of ethical issues, and on the other hand, to maybe also then add top-down processes on top of it. So let's say it that way. We understand that SREP is basically a bottom-up framework. It helps people who develop the stuff, so the design, data science companies, to do it in a better way if they want to do it in a better way. But what's very important in doing it is that they trace everything. So they need to first identify where's an ethical issue. Then they need to really write this down, make everyone aware of the team that there has been this issue. It should be shared reflection about that. And then there should be a shared solution where everyone agrees that this could be tried out, and then this would be implemented. Learning from it, did it work good or not? And then again, trying to improve it in a better way. And this has to be traced. So if you imagine, for example, did you hear about design principles yet? The idea of design principles. So there are approaches where you say a design principle always has a domain relation, so a reason for what it can be used. There's sometimes a theory underneath it, and there's a design element to say, in this way, you could tackle it. So a design principle is something that is abstracted from a community by saying, okay, we learned that if you include this design principle, it works better. And now imagine we have a repository, a community-driven repository, where all the companies being interested in developing responsible solutions contribute with the ethical issues they identified in their domain, in their socio-technical interactions, and then they describe this ethical issue quite clearly. Yeah? They say, I identified XY, it includes the roles blah blah, it has the technical elements, I call this socio-technical interaction that, I applied the ethical principle of transparency, and this is the way how I try to solve it. This way another person having a similar problem could go, check the repository, ask for the STI, ask for the ethical principle being interested, take the solution up, work with it, and contribute, hey, I did it that way, and this worked even better. So this is just our first ideas of how to do that. And we think and believe that the community is there and that the community also has a responsibility, and we should also put it now on our sides, being interested in producing these ethical responsible systems. And over time, we need the infrastructures to have a shared approach to socially regulate each other. And then on top of that, I think politics could learn from what has been identified, how things have been tackled. And then this could maybe trigger some top-down processes. But this is just very roughly some ideas that we came up with. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much for taking us through all these layers, basically, and stakeholders that could be, intervened at some point in the process. We are in time, I would say. We have one more question in the chat that is coming from Jamba. So they say in Jamba, our focus is on enhancing access of people with disabilities to training and job opportunities in ICT and AI. So they are really, this is really relevant food for thought here. Thank you. So they are grateful for the talk. Do you think an anonymous application system hiding some of the data subject to biases like disabilities can be enforceable? Also, this could eliminate nepotism, for example. And in this talk, I remember some long time ago, I was working in ICT systems and in a context where there was nepotism, and I was asked, okay, but where is the button where I can make the final decision, So how the system can work very fine, but I want that button for myself.
Christoph, do you want, or I would have an example for that? So
go ahead, I will continue
just very shortly
afterwards.
And you conclude then. Do you know Studo? Studo, the app for your studies. It's an application that helps you to do your studies. And
yes, I use Studo.
Yes, and they built a
perfect
job matchmaking on it, not a matchmaking platform on it, but they had some idea to Untitled. They offer jobs to students also based on their characteristics. And they learned or did implement the feature that they didn't include the gender as metadata because they said it's simply irrelevant. And in this way, the job seeker or the company could also only ask for, let's say I want a master's, he has to have IT skills, blah, 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 but no gender. And then he would simply receive the best person fitting on that description. This is a way, and definitely a way, to tackle that. Another way I would say is to just train your employees to be responsible and to not apply such stupid decisions and excluding people. Just, I think it could be solved either by excluding such statements, such metadata, or by just educating your people. But yeah, it's a problem and it could be a solution. But Christoph, maybe you have a closing to that.
I think I agree. You kind of have to turn a blind eye to certain attributes to get rid of some of the bias. But as we already talked about before, you have to be very careful on what you take out of the data as to not, well, let's say, harm the integrity of the data set and basically, let's say, destroy the training data for your algorithm. You have to be careful about that. I find the question about the nepotism very interesting. I think if you would ask me how to employ an AI system to get rid of nepotism, I would say as a first step, don't use an AI system, but rather try to enforce organizational policies to get rid of nepotism. And I know this is not possible, but if you're not able to employ the organizational policies, then the AI system would also not really help, because there would be this button to say, I overrule this decision and I want to install my brother as the next CEO and not this guy who has 5 master's degrees and is really competent. So nepotism is a really hard thing to tackle, because I think to a certain degree we are hardwired to feel closer to our let's say own blood, for the sake of a better argument, or maybe to cash in on some kind of favors that I have given out in the past. So nepotism, hard to do. Other things easier to get rid of, I would say.
Thank you. Perhaps a little bit aspirational question, last one, before we conclude, or perhaps we conclude with this one. So can we say that after really applying this framework, there will be a point in time where we will say that now we are done with reflecting on all the ethical AI questions, our systems are clean? Can we aspire to something like that?
I don't think so. This is something which we should just take on board of our, let's say, everyday thinking, at least when it's about leveraging new technology or developing new technology. When you are taking something that is at least saying it's intelligent, no matter what, if there is a deep learning algorithm underneath, or just a simple filter algorithm which seems to be intelligent to you, once there's more automatism, there can be more problems. So unfortunately, I don't think we get rid of that, but let's say fortunately, we hopefully get more of these discussions to get better outcomes, and then this is no problem at all. I would say. Let's have fun with developing ethically responsible systems, and yeah, just accept that this will be the case and the way to go.
Wonderful. No, thank you. Very, very clear. Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you, Christoph, for really making the time to talk to us today about.
Also, thanks to you. Thanks for the invitation, and also thanks for the nice discussion in the end. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We wish all the participants a beautiful evening. Join us for our next talk. There is a link in the chat. Thank you all, and follow us, share our events, and have a lovely evening. Thank you very much. Stay safe. Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.